If you're a ruler, what's the one thing you absolutely positively cannot afford to mess up? Well, if you ask Niccolo Machiavelli, the answer is simple: your army. In his infamous book, The Prince, he just lays out some of the most brutal and honestly timeless advice on how to build and keep military power. So let's dive into why Machiavelli was so convinced that the only army you can ever really trust is your own.
Okay, so to really get Machiavelli, you've got to picture the world he was living in. We're talking early 1500s Italy, and it was a total mess. It was this chaotic patchwork of little city-states, and everyone was constantly invading everyone else. For Machiavelli, this wasn't some academic exercise, This was real life. He was watching his home get torn to shreds by foreign armies, and it drove him nuts. He was desperate to figure out why. Why were they so weak? So what was the deal? What was the root cause of all this vulnerability? I mean, you had these Italian rulers who seemed powerful, right? But they would just crumble. Machiavelli looked at all this and he zeroed in on one single fatal flaw. And here's the crazy part. It was the very armies they were paying to keep them safe.
He basically said that these princes were falling for two huge, dangerous traps. They were depending on two kinds of armies, what he called mercenaries and auxiliaries. And he argued they weren't just useless, they were actually a massive threat to the ruler's power.
All right, let's tackle the first one. Mercenaries, soldiers for hire. This was super common back then. And the logic seems pretty straightforward, right? You pay them money, they go fight your battles. Simple. But for Machiavelli, oh no. This wasn't a solution. He saw it as a surefire recipe for complete disaster.
So what's the fundamental problem? Well, it all boils down to one thing. A mercenary's only motivation is cash. That's it. They don't love your country, they couldn't care less about your cause. They have zero loyalty. Machiavelli put it perfectly. He said their only affection is for a trifling wage. And that's just not enough to make someone willing to die for you.
And man, Machiavelli does not pull any punches here. He has nothing but contempt for them. He calls them disunited, undisciplined, treacherous, the list goes on. He says they're all tough and brave when they're hanging out with their friends, but the second they face a real enemy, they're cowards. The bottom line is this: if you hire mercenaries, your ruin is only postponed. It's just a matter of time until you actually need them, and that's when they'll fail you.
And this wasn't just theory. He had real-world examples. Take the story of Francesco Sforza. This guy was a mercenary general hired by Milan to go fight Venice. And you know what? He was good. He won. He beat the Venetians. So what happened next? He immediately flips, joins forces with the very enemy he just defeated, and uses his army to attack and conquer Milan, his own employer. That's the terrifying logic here. A successful mercenary doesn't make you safer. He becomes the biggest threat you have.
Okay, so if mercenaries are a definite no-go, what about plan B? Calling on a powerful ally, a neighboring king, to send you some troops. Machiavelli called these auxiliaries. And you're not going to believe this. He thought they were even worse.
Now, here's the twist. Unlike those unreliable mercenaries, auxiliary armies are usually the real deal. They're disciplined, they're a unified fighting force, they're skilled, they're good. So what's the catch? The problem is, their loyalty belongs to someone else, not you.
And this, right here, is what Machiavelli called the auxiliary trap. It is a perfect, inescapable catch-22. Think about it. If these borrowed troops fight for you and they lose, well, you're ruined. But what if they win? Now you're completely at their mercy. A victory won with someone else's army isn't your victory. It just means you owe them big time, and now they're the ones calling the shots.
And this is just such a brilliant counterintuitive point. Let's break it down. With mercenaries, the biggest danger is their cowardice. They'll just run away when things get tough. But with auxiliaries, the biggest danger is their skill. They'll win the battle for you, and then they'll turn around and conquer you. Either way you go, it's a dead end.
So, Machiavelli has just completely torched the two most popular military strategies of his time. He's torn them to shreds. So, where does that leave a poor prince? What are you supposed to do? Well, he offers one single, crystal clear, no exceptions solution.
Yeah, the question just hangs in the air, right? If you can't hire guns and you can't borrow an army from your friends, then how on earth are you supposed to defend your state? How do you hold on to power?
And the answer, from Machiavelli, is incredibly stark and simple. You rely on your own forces, an army made up of your own citizens, your own subjects. That's it. End of story. For him, this is the one and only road to real, lasting security.
And to really drive this point home, he uses a powerful analogy that everybody in his day would have instantly understood: the story of David and Goliath. You know how it goes. The young shepherd boy David steps up to fight the giant Goliath, and King Saul, trying to be helpful, offers David his own personal kingly set of armor.
But David tries on the armor and immediately says, nope, can't use this. Why? Because it wasn't his. It was awkward, it didn't fit right, it just weighed him down. And this is Machiavelli's whole point. Another person's armor, just like another person's army, either falls off you or weighs you down or constricts your movements. It's useless to you. David knew he had to win with his own tools, his sling and his knife. And a prince has to do the exact same thing.
But okay, let's say you've got your own army now. You're not done, not even close. For Machiavelli, having the right kind of army is just step one. The ruler themselves has to become a master of war. This is not something you can just delegate to your generals.
And this leads to one of the most famous and frankly chilling lines in the entire book. For a ruler, war isn't just part of the job, it is the job. It should be their only concern, their only thought. He warns that any ruler who gets distracted by the refinements of life instead of focusing on war is absolutely 100% guaranteed to lose their state.
So how does a prince actually do this? How do they prepare? Machiavelli lays out a two-part training plan. First, you've got to train through action, things like hunting all the time. It makes you physically tough, and, more importantly, it teaches you the lay of your own land, every hill, every river, every valley. And second, you have to train your mind. That means studying history, poring over the great battles, and figuring out why great commanders won and why they lost.
And he wraps up this whole argument by quoting the ancient Roman historian Tacitus, and it just perfectly summarizes everything we've talked about. The quote basically means that nothing is so weak or unstable as a reputation for power that is not based on one's own forces. Wow. True strength, real power, can never be borrowed or rented. It has to be yours and yours alone. Which really makes you think, right? 500 years later, in our world of complicated alliances and interconnected economies, does that ruthless piece of advice still hold true?